is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
A president detained, a constitution suspended, and a government dissolved. These have been the developments in recent weeks in the West African nation of Guinea-Conakry, and that's following a military coup led by Colonel Mamady Doumbuya. The military has cited poverty, rampant corruption, and an unpopular constitutional change as its reasons for grabbing power. But will an unconstitutional takeover lead Guinea out of its troubles or further deepen them? And what are the issues facing Guinea that led to its current situation? We look into these questions this week on the program. I am Liu Feifei. Welcome to Talk Africa. Helping us to unpack recent developments in their context, I'm joined by a panel of analysts via Zoom. In London is Paul Melly. He's a consulting fellow for the African program at Chatham House. In Pretoria, we're joined by Dr. David Zuemanu, senior research fellow for West Africa in the Africa Conflict Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies. Dr. Doudou Sidibé is in Paris, and he's a professor of political science at the University of Gustave Eiffel. And Mr. Abubakar Diaby joins us from New Jersey. He's a researcher in political science and international relations at the Guinea Political Science Association. Gentlemen, thank you all for your time today. Now let's get right into it. The situation in Guinea has continued to unfold since the coup of September 5th. Paul, let me come to you with this question. What do you think are the recent events that are responsible for the precipitation of the coup that took place?
Well, I think Guinea, President Alpha Conde had, as it were, taken Guinea into a dead end, if you like, into a political cul-de-sac, because he served 2 terms. He is the first democratically elected president of Guinea, which had suffered under many, many decades of authoritarian rule before. But then towards the end of his 2nd term, he organized a referendum that was very mismanaged, if you like, not really a democratic process at all, and which changed the constitution to allow him to run for a 3rd term. And then he ran for election in October of last year, secured that 3rd term in a contest that, again, much of the opposition felt was unfair. And so for many Guineans, they felt that this process was shrinking their democratic choice. And at the same time, he wasn't really very interested in listening to his critics or engaging with other points of view. So although the coup in itself, by definition, of course, breaks the constitutional rules, many Guineans would feel that, in fact, Alpha Conde had already broken the spirit of democracy and the constitution by the way he'd behaved over the previous 2 years. So I think that's fundamentally the driver. And at a time when Guinea was deep under economic pressure and, of course, the impact of COVID and many other difficulties.
Dr. Zuemanu, let me come to you for a second. Now, as Paul just mentioned, the ousted President Conde was in fact the first democratically elected president of Guinea, and he's been in office since 2010. Can you set the stage for us? In this decade while he was in office, what were some of the milestones of his administration?
Very interesting questions, and I think the previous colleague said seen very well. I think I will answer this question in 2 parts. I will take the first part looking at Alpha Conde's personal trajectory in bringing about democracy in Guinea. This is someone with a very rich history and also commitment to challenge autocratic roles that prevails in Guinea. I think since the rule of Ahmed Sékou Touré until his death in 1984, and the role of Lansana Conte, another general who staged a coup to remain in power. So someone spent 40 years fighting for the birth of democracy, was given a chance in 2010 in a very I would say, depressive and very repressive environment following the Dadis Camara chaotic transition to help Guinea get back to democracy and consolidate the rule of law. Of course, there have been some initiatives has taken to improve the economy to a certain level. I think the economic growth around 4.2%. Though if you look at it statistically, it might sound good, but in terms of distribution or redistribution to the people, it's absolutely nothing. So you still have rampant poverty in Guinea. Youth unemployment continue to remain a serious challenge to the country, an element of fragility of the country. And this sabotage the hopes that Guinean people pin upon his election. So it's a wasted decades for Guinea, which adds to the suffering that that country has experienced since its independence in the hand of someone who is unlikely to behave the way it is. But this is probably a trend that we witness in Africa, where opposition leaders surf on a democratic agenda, got to power, won power, but scorn it or abuse it.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that trend of coups in West Africa. Abu Bakar, I want to turn to you for a minute to talk about the role of ECOWAS, because as the coup has been unfolding, ECOWAS has been the one external actor, and probably rightly so, taking the largest role to plan the steps forward. Now, ECOWAS has come out and condemned the coup. They've asked for the reinstatement of the constitution, and in fact, they have held just recently an emergency summit of West African leaders to talk about next steps forward. Can you tell us about the issues that are on the table for ECOWAS now?
Well, thank you. I would like to thank the panel for their view and their wonderful discussion. So ECOWAS, as we know, is the West African regional organization. Basically everybody knows actually what's going on. So, well, I think ECOWAS is in its full right to condemn any coup d'etat. Let's say any constitutional coup d'etat, well, any like a military coup d'etat. But the main issue, the main problem actually here, why ECOWAS is condemning the military coup, why they are not reacting to condemn the constitutional coup. And that's why many people, and many scholars, and many thinkers, have this idea to reform the institution itself. Because the credibility and the vision of ECOWAS is a main issue for many African young population or the young leaders. There's African ECOWAS is now moving forward because the restructuration and of the organization is not working well. That's my view. I think, yeah. Go ahead.
You've touched on a very complicated dilemma, haven't you? Now, it's not just ECOWAS. In fact, the UN, the AU, which in its charter is against military coups, and ECOWAS, in addition to many national governments and national leaders, have stepped up to condemn the military coup. But others, as you mentioned, have said that they interceded too late, that there was a time for them to intercede and prevent the coup, while there are yet other people who are saying each country is a sovereign nation and there's no room for these international regional organizations to come in. It's very complex. Dr. Sidibe, let's come to you. You're an expert in conflict resolution. Now, at some point, there's going to be a resolution between ECOWAS and the international community and Colonel Doumbuya. Given what we know about him, he's actually been very quiet, but he has been meeting with all of the civil society groups there in Guinea. And given what we know about what ECOWAS wants, do you think there is a path to resolution going forward?
Yes, I think that the first step to resolve a conflict is to discuss. And he's organizing this discussion with the different stakeholders in order to find a common ground, okay? And I think that the next step would be negotiation, because discussing and negotiating are different. When you discuss, you just exchange point of view. But if you negotiate, it means that you are ready to do concessions, okay? And I think that the Colonel Mamady cannot rule alone. He should do some concession to give some power to the political parties, to the traditional chiefs, to youth, to women, to every domain of the society. You know, he should be inclusive, okay, and also efficient. And I can add also the transition he's proposing maybe in the next days should be as short as possible. In conflict resolution, when you would like to reconstruct a country, what is proposed is 2 years, okay? The minimum of 18 months and the maximum of 2 years. It is what we had in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, but in that case, they were obliged to add 1 year because there was some complication. And in this case, it is very different because Guinea is not coming from a conflict, an open conflict, okay? Just a dead end, political dead end. It means that the transition can be shorter so that they can shift to a civilian rule. And it will be wonderful for the country, and Mamady Doumbouya will succeed. His transition and his coup will be something useful.
On that note, gentlemen, we leave it there for the moment to take a short break. But when we get back, we'll look at what the coming days and months should look like for Guinea. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Paul Milley, Dr. David Zouin-Manu, Dr. Doudou Sidibé, and Mr. Abubakar Diaby are our guests now. Let's turn and shift gears. Africa has had a history of coups. In fact, since 2010, there have been just about 40 coup attempts in Africa. And this is compared in the same timeline to 6 attempts in Asia, 1 in Central America, 1 in South America, and 1 in Europe. So the question is to Abubakar, what is causing all these coups in Africa?
Well, that's a wonderful question to ask. And then the solution is very deep, and then I think my panel will have different approach, different view about the causes of the coup d'etat in Africa. So from my own view, I think when the leader fail the agenda, when they promise to do a job for the people and they fail those jobs, and then it's let's say from my own country, Guinea. And then Alpha Conde as a freedom fighters, like Guinea has experienced many years of political violence, coup d'etat since 1980, since 1999, let's say that. We have so many coup d'etat in Africa. Why? Because most of the leaders trying to remain in power and violate their own constitutions. That's the one aspect. There are also many other aspects the colleague can point out. For right now, if you look at the 42 coup d'etat Africa has experienced, and most of these coup d'etat because those leaders has violated their own constitutions, and the people have a right to protest, and who has to defend the people is the army. So that's why Africa today is experiencing many level of coup d'etat.
Dr. Zouin-Manu, yes, thank you. Let me turn to Dr. Zouin-Manu. let's look at specifically West Africa. This is a troubling trend towards a reversal of more coups, in fact, coming out of West Africa recently. Now, there have been 2 coups in Mali in the past 13 months. We've had an attempted coup in Niger earlier this year. And that's not to mention the military's involvement in what took place in Chad. And now, of course, the coup in Guinea. Is something happening specifically here in West Africa that we all need to be concerned about?
I think we have to be concerned. Jabi pointed out, and rightly so, that there are structural factors that continue to undermine good governance in the region. Mind you, between, I will say, 1960s or 62, to be exact, from the first coup in Togo to the recent one, we can count up to 90 successful coups in Africa, and almost 115 attempted coups globally. So if you want to play with a statistic, we used to have 4 coups annually within that period. Notoriously known for coups are Benin, Nigeria, Ghana, and others. Now, the bracket in which we found ourselves, or the situation in which we found ourselves today, is explained by the successful attempts by democratically elected leaders to close the democratic avenues. If you see, in 2007, or from 2007 to 2015, there have been at least 5 attempts to amend the constitution for the 3rd term. All the 5 attempts failed, from Nigeria to Burkina Faso. But from 2016 up to today, many countries found it easy to change the constitution for the 3rd term. And we are living in the historic context where the army remain the only structured organizations with a command and control in place where you can see that coup. And before I leave the floor, I just want to point out something very important. If you look at the last coup that we have over the past since 2010, those coups, maybe 2000, those coups are not staged by generals as we used to see in the 60s and 70s. Those coups are staged by captain or colonels, which tells you there's a kind of disjunction between the high command of the army and the rank and file, simply because most of the generals are co-opted in the pervasive political process, giving the assurance to the president that he doesn't need to get his legitimacy from the people anymore through transparent elections, but through the barrel of a gun. And that's why we are seeing the return of that problem in West Africa today.
Paul, on that note, let's turn to you. Certainly the coups are happening in Africa with more regularity these days than elsewhere in the world. And one of the things that people point out to a common thread is the French legacy in this area. Can you unpack that for us?
I think Abu Bakr is right in pointing out that coups have taken place in other parts of the other countries as well. In fact, Nigeria, Ghana, very regularly had coups. So I don't really think that it's connected to who the former colonial power was. I think the really important thing is that in the beginning of the 1990s and then through the course of that decade, most countries in West Africa moved to multi-party democratic systems. And people's expectations were raised. And of course, they were raised even further once you have satellite television and the internet, which means that people can see what's going on in other countries. And what then happened is when governments that came to power through the democratic route begin to let the public down, they start trying to dismantle some of the democratic safeguards that were there. They try to change the constitution to get an extra term, or they start passing restrictions on the opposition. In Benin, for example, we had a parliamentary election, I think in April last year, where the Benin government passed a law that actually prevented any of the opposition parties from standing candidates for parliament. So when you have those sorts of situations, governments originally elected democratically, but which then dismantle the democratic safeguards that surround the structure, the democratic constitutional structure that people have become used to, that creates a public climate of opinion in which ordinary people are willing to support the intervention of the military.
Let me just
So
follow up
I
on
think
that,
these
Paul.
are
Paul, let me interrupt you and follow up on that, because that's a theme that's come out in the discussion earlier, is this switch. Once they get into power, then they start dismantling the constitutions that have brought them to power. How do we break that cycle?
Well, I think now is a moment of real challenge for ECOWAS, because there are in the ECOWAS bloc some very statesman-like, experienced leaders who have the capacity to take a long-term view. And they need to think very hard now, how can the bloc reconsolidate its constitutional rules, its basic sort of governing frameworks, so that situations don't arise again. We've just had a presidential election in Niger earlier this year, and although the opposition complained about aspects of the way the election was conducted, one of the most significant facts was simply that the president, the outgoing president, when he completed his second term, and people said, well, why are you not trying to stay on? Why are you not thinking of changing the constitution? He just said, there are 25 million people in Niger, and it would be very arrogant of me to assume that I'm the only person capable of governing this country. And yes, his party got itself very well organized so that very easily he could put his chosen successor as the candidate to take over straight afterwards. So the same party is still in power, but at least Nigerians have the opportunity, if you like, to engage in an electoral process and decide, did they want that candidate or did they want somebody from another party? So although there are still critiques you can make about the way the political situation has worked there, at least that basic principle that at the end of 2 terms, hands down, because that's what the Constitution says, was established, and probably is going to take leadership of that kind from several other of the more senior ECOWAS leaders, perhaps the President of Ghana, perhaps President Ouattara in Côte d'Ivoire, possibly the President of Senegal. A number of presidents are going to actually need to go out there on public stage, as it were, and say that the region has to strengthen constitutional governance. But it'll be a tough call.
And on that note, we are just about out of time. I have time for one last quick question to each one of you. Dr. Doumbuya, let me come to you first. What is the most critical next step in this transition process?
Well, I think as Dr. Sidibe said, is simply to talk and to define the new course of action for political stability in Guinea. I think it's time to rewrite the constitution and to make it sacred, put in guarantees that make it almost impossible. As Jerry Rawlings used to say, and what happened in Ghana, even if the devil has to come from hell to rule Ghana, he will not get away with making mistake or manipulating the state institutions. That's what Guinea needs, strong institutions, not leadership. And just to add to what Paul had just mentioned, ECOWAS has put on table the amendment of its protocol to make 2 terms compulsory, mandatory for anyone in the region. But that decision was opposed by Togo and Gambia at that time. Maybe it's a moment to think about returning those provisions into ECOWAS protocol so that it has regional implications and has national implications for every country.
Paul, Guinea is a country of 13 million people with many different ethnicities. What needs to happen internally to ensure stability going forward?
Well, I think what you really need is a strong basis of consensus for the rebuilding of the democracy. Whatever one thinks of Colonel Doumbuya's motives, he made a really interesting point that basically Guinea's first attempt at having a strong democracy hasn't quite worked, if you like. That the process of that democratic constitution existed, in fact, there were many aspects of the system that didn't function properly. The human rights abuses that have been able to develop really over the last 2 or 3 years, the situation's been getting worse and worse. And so you've got to find a new consensual basis to really build a broad-based democracy that everybody feels they have a stake in, and not only, as Dr. Zoumana said, consolidate the two-term rules so that people who lose elections think, well, that's okay, we'll get another chance in a few years' time. And perhaps also decentralization, because when you get decentralization, you get a situation where, for example, an opposition party that's lost the national election is nevertheless perhaps still able to win some important municipal elections or power at a regional level, so that it isn't just sometimes you hear people say, well, whoever's in power wants to eat the whole cake and just keep it all for themselves. If the cake is divided up so that no one can eat the whole cake, that may help to underpin stability as well.
Dr. Sidibe, let me give you the last word on this. Now, Colonel Doumbuya has come out and said that the military and the elites had made mistakes, and he's promised not to make the same mistakes going forward. What needs to be done to make him keep his word?
I think that he should continue like he's doing in order to talk with everybody and to be inclusive, and to also work hard on economic issues. Why economic issues? Because a lot of countries are experiencing coup because they have economic fragility. They cannot fight against poverty. And if people are poor, they are tempted to go to rebellion or to riots. Okay, democracy could not keep up with poverty, and it is another challenge for Colonel Doumbuya, apart from the political challenge.
And that's all the time we have on Talk Africa this week. A thank you to our panelists for their analysis and insights. Paul Melly in London is a consulting fellow for the Africa program at Chatham House. And in Pretoria, Dr. David Zoumana is a senior researcher for West Africa in the Africa Conflict Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies. Dr. Doudou Sidibe is in Paris, and he is a professor of political science at the University of Gustave Eiffel. And Mr. Abubakar Diaby is in New Jersey, and he is a researcher in political science and international relations at the Guinea Political Science Association. Now, remember, you can engage with us on this subject through our social media platforms on Twitter and Facebook, and also catch this episode of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. See you again next time on Talk Africa. From Nairobi, I am Liu Feifei. Goodbye.